If you've been on the internet recently, you might have noticed a subtle trend, which is that oil has somehow become the main character again. Not in a nostalgic, remember when gas was cheap kind of way, but in a why is everything suddenly more expensive and slightly concerning kind of way. And the reason for that is simple. Oil is doing something. More specifically, oil is going up, going down, and threatening to do both at the same time, which is not ideal for something that powers most of modern civilization. So naturally, people are asking the question, is this bad? And the answer is absolutely, perfectly, catastrophically, depending on how dramatic you want to feel today. To understand why oil is suddenly everywhere again, we first need to understand what oil actually is in the global economy. Because oil is not just fuel. Oil is transportation, oil is shipping, oil is manufacturing, oil is plastics, oil is aviation, oil is, in many cases, electricity. And more importantly, oil is cost. Because almost everything you buy has at some point been moved, produced, refined, or packaged using oil, which means when oil prices move, everything else quietly follows, usually upward. Not dramatically, just enough to make everything feel slightly worse. Now, here's where things start to feel confusing. Because if you look at long-term projections, the world is not actually running out of oil. In fact, in some cases, there may even be more supply than demand in the coming years, which sounds like it should make things cheaper. But instead, prices spike, which raises a very reasonable question. How can there be too much oil and not enough oil at the same time? And the answer is logistics. Oil does not exist where you need it. It exists where it is found, and then it has to travel. Across oceans, through pipelines, across borders, through systems that depend on stability. And unfortunately, stability is not guaranteed. A large portion of the world's oil moves through a few key routes, and when anything happens near those routes, even slightly, markets react immediately. Not because supply has already disappeared, but because it might. And in markets, might is enough. So even a small disruption or even the possibility of one can push prices upward, which is why oil often reacts faster than reality itself. The market is not just pricing what is happening, it is pricing what could happen, what might happen, and what everyone is suddenly worried might happen. Now, you might think if prices are going up, why don't producers simply produce more oil? And the answer is that they can, but they often choose not to, at least not immediately. Because producing oil requires planning, it requires investment, it requires time. And most importantly, it requires confidence. And confidence is not exactly stable right now. Oil companies have experienced cycles where prices rise, production increases, and then demand slows or supply overshoots, which causes prices to crash. So now, even when prices go up, producers hesitate, because reacting too quickly can create the exact problem they are trying to avoid, which creates a situation where prices are high, but supply does not immediately increase, which keeps prices high, which creates a loop. Not a helpful loop, just a loop. Now, let's talk about demand, because supply is only half of the story. Demand is the other half. And demand depends on the global economy. When economies grow, demand increases. More goods are produced, more products are shipped, more people travel, more factories run, more trucks move, more planes fly. But when economies slow down, demand decreases. Production slows, shipping slows, travel slows, people buy less, companies move less, energy use softens. So now we have two forces. Supply uncertainty pushing prices up, and demand uncertainty pulling prices down at the same time, which leads to volatility. Prices don't just move, they swing, sometimes quickly, sometimes unpredictably, sometimes in ways that make everyone who thought they understood the market immediately become humble. And that makes planning extremely difficult, especially for industries that rely on stable costs, which is most industries. because oil is not just something airlines care about or gas stations care about. It reaches retail, food, freight, chemicals, agriculture, and basically anything that has to get from somewhere to somewhere else. Now add geopolitics into this, because oil is not just an economic resource, it is a strategic one. Countries that produce oil have influence, countries that control transport routes have influence, and countries that depend on oil are affected by both. Which means oil is constantly tied to political decisions, conflicts, sanctions, alliances, threats, negotiations, and sometimes actions that are less about economics and more about leverage. A decision made in one region can affect prices globally, almost instantly, because markets react to expectations, not just reality. So when something happens or even looks like it might happen, prices adjust. And once prices adjust, the effects begin, even if the original issue is not fully developed. That is what makes oil such a strange topic online. It sounds like a commodity, but it behaves like a mood swing with a shipping route attached. Now, this is where things start to feel more intense, because everything is happening faster. Information spreads instantly, markets react instantly, people react instantly, which means the entire cycle has compressed. What used to take days now takes hours, what used to take hours now takes minutes. And that speed makes everything feel more unstable, even when the underlying system hasn't changed as much as it seems. This is one of the main reasons oil trends so hard online. The real-world change may be gradual, but the online reaction is immediate. So by the time most people hear about oil moving, the story has already been transformed into a dramatic headline, a commentary video, a chart, 3 predictions, and a man in a suit explaining why this means the next decade is either perfect or doomed. Now let's bring this back to something practical, because all of this might sound distant, but it is not. When oil prices rise, transportation costs increase. When transportation costs increase, businesses pass those costs along, which means prices go up. Groceries, shipping, flights, services, construction, delivery, everything. Not all at once, but gradually, consistently, enough that you notice, but not enough that you immediately understand why. And if prices remain high long enough, they begin to affect spending. When things cost more, people buy less. When people buy less, businesses slow down. And when businesses slow down, economies follow. That's why oil gets so much attention. It is not just a fuel story, it is a cost story. It is a consumer story. It is a why is my receipt longer than my patience story. Now here's the ironic part. High oil prices are bad, but very low oil prices are also bad. When prices drop too much, companies reduce investment, production slows, future supply weakens, and eventually prices rise again. So the system naturally moves between two states. This is expensive, and this will be expensive later, which is not ideal, but it is consistent. Consistency is one of the few things the oil market offers, because it regularly reminds everyone that it will never be simple for more than 5 minutes. Now add technology into the equation, because modern markets are heavily influenced by automation. Algorithms respond to data, trades happen instantly, reactions happen faster than human decision-making, which increases speed but also increases volatility. Because automated systems do not hesitate, they respond immediately. Small changes trigger large reactions, which then trigger more reactions, and suddenly a minor shift becomes a noticeable movement, a headline, a theory, and a dozen people pretending they predicted everything. Combine that with how news works. Every price increase becomes a major story. Every disruption becomes a potential crisis. Every headline suggests escalation, which makes sense because urgency attracts attention, but it also amplifies perception. So even normal fluctuations can feel significant. The oil market is not just moving, it is being watched constantly by traders, governments, companies, consumers, and people who normally do not care about barrels per day until they hear the word spike. Now let's go back to the original question. Is something big about to happen? And the answer remains the same. Well, maybe, or maybe not. Either way, grab some popcorn. because the oil market is always near something. Not necessarily collapse, but change. Sometimes that change is small, sometimes it is large, and sometimes it looks larger than it actually is because the system amplifies movement faster than most people can follow. Oil is not unstable, it is responsive. It reacts to supply, demand, politics, expectations, and uncertainty all at once, which means it is constantly adjusting. And those adjustments can look dramatic, even when they're a part of a normal cycle. When you see oil trending, it does not necessarily mean something unprecedented is happening. It means something has changed, or might change, and the market is responding, which it always does. Now bring this back to perception, because perception is important. Before, most people did not track oil prices daily. Now they do. Information is immediate, which makes every movement visible, and visibility increases awareness, which increases concern. So it feels like things are happening more often, even if they're not. And that is where a lot of the anxiety comes from. Not from the actual market move, but from the fact that the move is now impossible to ignore. It's on your feed, in your news cycle, in your search results, in the background of everything else that is already happening. Combine all of this: global dependence, fragile logistics, political influence, market speed, information flow, human reaction, and you get a system that feels constantly on edge even when it is functioning as expected. Everything seems fine until it isn't. And oil is one of the clearest examples of that because it connects everything and reacts to everything at the same time. So is the world about to spiral into chaos because of oil? Maybe, but it kind of always feels like that. Because oil sits at the center of a system that is constantly balancing multiple forces, and that balance is never perfect, which means things will always feel slightly unstable even when they aren't, or slightly stable even when they aren't, which is not comforting, but it is realistic. So the next time you see oil prices rising, falling, or doing both at once, just remember this is not new. It just feels new, because now you're seeing it in real time, and real time always feels more intense, and that intensity makes every change feel bigger than it actually is, even when it isn't. Which is why oil keeps trending, because it sits at the center of attention, and anything at the center of attention will always feel more important, even when it is just doing what it has always done, reacting to everything around it, and sometimes overreacting. Which is not comforting, but it is predictable. And predictability in a system like this is probably the closest thing you get to stability. Anyway, you can subscribe.